Hello, welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24 with me, Jean-Emile Jamine, taking a look at all your latest news from across the continent. It starts with these headlines. Senegal's ruling party looks set for a large majority after Sunday's parliamentary elections, one which would give Bassirou Diomaye Faye a strong mandate to carry out his anticipated economic reforms. We'll get more from the ground in Dakar with our correspondent Caitlin Kelly. Then initial results in Gabon show the country has voted overwhelmingly to adopt a new constitution that would limit presidential terms to 2, amongst others. And the EU approves a second €20 million installment to support Rwanda's army in Mozambique, aiding 5,000 troops combating jihadist insurgents in Cabo Delgado. Despite concerns over Rwanda's alleged links to DR Congo's M23 rebels, France and Italy have backed the strategic funding. Welcome to the show. We start this edition in Senegal, where the ruling Pastef party is projected for an overwhelming victory after Sunday's legislative polls. Any win for President Bassirou Diomaye Faye and Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko is set to strengthen their mandate to implement ambitious reforms and address economic and social changes. Let's get more now from our correspondent in Dakar, Caitlin Kelly. Caitlin, we joined you throughout yesterday, throughout Sunday, to go over these results. They weren't in yet. Have we got anything more? What's the latest?
We don't have official results yet, but the leaders of the opposition parties have conceded the election and have taken to social media to congratulate the ruling party, Pastef, on a majority. And even notably, the former leader, Macky Sall, and Prime Minister Sonko's rival has also congratulated Pastef. So as results came through the night, last night, people were out on the streets celebrating a Pastef majority. So I spent the day at the polls yesterday, as you said, and it seemed relatively calm affair. And even the Electoral Commission came out today congratulating and applauding the electorate for a relatively calm and upstanding election, which is also important given the context of a rather unrestful presidential election earlier in the year, a few spouts of violence this time around, but also in the wider context of the region. Senegal is seen as one of the more stable havens amidst governments that are now run by military junta and such. And so today has also been important, and the past 24 hours have been important for the reason of democracy here in West Africa.
And other ramifications if such a large majority is obtained by the Pastef party. They needed 83 seats for a majority. Predictions are they could get a lot more than that. Just how important would that sizable majority be?
That's right, Jean-Emile. We're reading from local media and other citizen vote counting websites and such that there could be a majority as big as 131 out of 165 seats in Parliament. That's a huge boost, regardless of how accurate the numbers are at the moment, for the Pastef party, because before Sunday they only had 56 seats in the Assembly. They claim that was hindering them, stopping them from instituting their policies and moving forward with this transformative agenda that they were elected on 8 months ago. So really what we've seen is an electorate who have gone, yes, we gave you the majority earlier this year, we're giving it to you again. And now the work really starts for Pastef, because there's big policies and big promises, including things like addressing corruption. They've promised to bring to justice previous corrupt politicians. They want to address social issues, reform the economy, including improving contracts with foreign investments and such. And overall, they want to have what they call an Afrocentric agenda. So earlier, I spoke to some Senegalese who told me that they're growing impatient for these changes. Here in Senegal, there's huge inflation, debt and unemployment. And so let's take a closer look at some of the new challenges that these elected deputies will have to address. In the heart of downtown Dakar, Al-Ousseynou waits in need of another customer. He hopes that the government will tackle the high cost of living so he can make ends meet for his family.
Rice is expensive. Sugar that's made here in Senegal is expensive. And let's not talk about oil. Everything you touch here in Senegal is too expensive.
Before, rice cost 350 to 400 francs. Now it's 500. It doesn't suit anyone. The government has to help us. It's no longer time for talking. They should get to work.
For people like Malik, it's the high level of unemployment that's the biggest concern, which doesn't even account for the informal economy, where young people are increasingly turning to.
We must first find employment for the people who are ready to work, because in Senegal, we have the human resources and there are enough young people.
During the campaign, Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko also promised if he won the legislative elections, he would ensure the High Court of Justice was capable of trying former officials.
There has been a lot of embezzlement. Sonko must investigate the deputies, the ministers, and all those suspected of theft.
The Senegalese people have huge expectations for their government, a government that are now on course for a majority in the parliament, as a series of urgent issues, including next year's budget, await these newly elected deputies.
And that was Caitlin Kelly coming earlier from the capital and speaking to us, unwrapping what the effects of this vote could mean for Senegal. Well, keeping with the theme of voting, we turn now to Gabon, where the country has overwhelmingly approved a new constitution in this weekend's referendum. That's according to provisional results. 91.8% are said to have voted yes, despite a low turnout of just over 53%. Laurent Berstecker takes a closer look at just some of the text's key elements.
More than a year after the military seized power, Gabon has definitively turned the page on the Ali Bongo era. The country's new constitution, which was backed by over 90% of voters in a weekend referendum, will bring about major changes to Gabon's political system. Under the new text, the president will rule without a prime minister for a maximum of 2 7-year terms and won't be able to transfer power to a family member. Presidential candidates will also need to have at least one parent born in Gabon, as well as a Gabonese spouse, a thinly veiled dig at toppled ruler Ali Bongo Ndimba, who's married to a French woman. General Brice Oligui Nguema hailed the referendum's outcome as a great step forward for the country. The president of the transition has vowed to hand back power to civilians by 2025, but has made no secret of his desire to run in next year's election. Critics, meanwhile, say the new constitution appears to be tailor-made to help Nguema stay in power.
Well, let's bring in political analyst Douglas Yates into the conversation. Douglas, you also are the author of A Historical Dictionary of Gabon, so you're very familiar with the country. We heard just at the end of that package, that report saying that this could be tailor-made for Nguema to stay in power. How do you respond to that?
Yes, I mean, clearly this was, first of all, a sounding board for him to see if he has legitimacy still over a year after he staged the coup. And the relatively decent turnout and the large number of people who voted yes indicates that not only have they accepted a new constitution, but they're probably going to vote for him in August.
So a very strong mandate.
Yes, and it was a gamble. He's taken many gambles. What makes this coup so unusual at the time is, unlike the other coup plotters who in the Sahel have said, we're going to hold on to power and we're going to use Russia as our military ally, we're never returning to civilian rule, he's played the game by the rules. He said, this is a transition, I'm going to restore civilian rule. He did a long dialogue this spring with civil society, which produced 1,000 recommendations. Most of those were incorporated into this, and he held a referendum. By all indications, it was a fair and free referendum. Things like in Libreville, the capital, where there were many members of the former regime who were unhappy, about 20% voted no. This wasn't an Equato-Guinean referendum.
Does that then give basically an indication of how to be a junta?
Yes. You know, he's kept his alliances. He's played his cards very well with the United States, for example, and the West. He's indicated that he's going to keep Gabon in the Western camp. He's had talks with international lenders, including private lenders who just came out this week to Gabon. He's worked with members of civil society. He's managed to integrate former members of the regime who had been opposed to Ali Bongo, but who had government competence. So far, he's played all his cards excellently.
And now looking forward, if you take into account what this referendum has basically been about and the changes to the constitution, What does that give in terms of a perspective? What can we expect basically to securitize the fact that there won't be what we've seen before in terms of political dynasties?
Well, some of the articles in this now approved referendum would prevent, for example, his children from succeeding him in power. It prevents family members from succeeding rulers. Also, getting rid of the prime ministership will make this a clear presidential regime, which will not necessarily make the legislature secondary, but will mean there's no more confusion where a president can blame a prime minister and change his prime minister like changing a shirt. There'll be a clear responsibility focused on Ngema. Also, it prevents members of the Bongo dynasty from returning to power, not only Nuruddin Bongo, who many suspect is still under house arrest, but Omar Dennis Bongo Jr., the grandson of Denis Sassou Nguesso, might also be excluded for not having two Gabonese parents. The Gabonite in this case is not like Ivoirite. It's really something designed to keep the Bongo dynasty out. They're fabulously rich, they're well connected. If he's not careful, they could stage a counter coup.
Then if we look at where Gabon sits in terms of its relations to the outside world, under this administration and looking ahead now with this new constitution, can we expect a independent Gabon? Can we expect a country which moves more towards the West? How do we envisage it?
Yeah, so Gabon is a country that has long been an ally of the West. It votes with the West in international forum. It works on things like the Congo Rainforest Basin Initiative. It signed the Paris Accords for climate change. And it didn't accept having a Chinese military base established there. These were big deals in global geopolitics. Gabon right now is in a partnership with the state of West Virginia National Guard to develop its security, and he sent messages to Washington, to France, to NATO partners that Gabon remains in the Western camp at a time when other military leaders are accepting the temptation of Russia.
And a final note, do we expect a expect a peaceful transition of power?
Yes. There's every indication. This was the man in particular who had done the dirty work for the Bongo regime. In the previous elections, it was the Republican Guard who did the violence on protesters. The fact that he refused this time to repeat that scenario indicates that this will be a peaceful transition to power. A great surprise would be, imagine if he doesn't run.
Oh, I don't know. It would quite go against the grain, certainly. Douglas, thank you so much for your insights, as always. Douglas Yates there on that referendum in Gabon. Moving on, hundreds of illegal miners, known as Zama-Zamas, are still trapped in dire conditions in an abandoned mine shaft near Stilfontein, South Africa. Police operations had until recently blocked food and water supplies, leaving miners to starve and some critically ill. Community volunteers and other miners have risked their lives to aid those survivors, though many remain underground. The government faces criticism for not providing sufficient help, while the miners themselves, desperate for work, remain determined to return. Let's hear from some volunteers and community leaders.
I don't want to lie, they have been stuffed for quite some time, so you can see it's just the bones, the skin is just covering the bone at this moment. So they are very critical. They can't even speak, they can't drink. It's not easy. They are starving down there.
If the government, like they say, or the minister said verbally that they are committed to assist and work with the communities to save people, that won't impress us until it happens, until physically we see the rescuers here rescuing people in their safe way.
And just up north in Mozambique, Rwandan troops helping to combat jihadist insurgencies in the north of the country have received a fresh €20 million cash injection from the EU this Monday. The decision in Brussels to provide more finance was very tense, with Kigali accused of supporting the armed group M23 rebels in the DR Congo. Clément Di Roma in Rwanda brings us the latest.
European foreign ministers have approved a second €20 million installment for the Rwandan army from the European Peace Facility. This funding will support around 5,000 troops deployed in Mozambique by covering air transport and equipment costs, excluding lethal weapons. The Rwandan army has been active in the northern province of Cabo Delgado since 2021, combating a jihadist insurgency. An initial €20 million was provided in 2023, but this year's approval followed months of debate in Brussels, with countries like Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany and Belgium voicing concerns over Rwanda's alleged support for M23 rebels in DR Congo. Belgium, with strained diplomatic relations to Kigali, demanded conditions on the aid, such as limits on Rwandan officer transfers across the army's different operations. France, Italy and Portugal backed this new disbursement, highlighting its strategic importance. In Mozambique, Rwandan forces help safeguard gas projects, including those of the French giant Total Energy, which aim to diversify Europe's gas supply away from US sources.
Well, that's it from Eye on Africa. Thanks for staying tuned. There's more news coming up on France 24.